Hi, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Ok Xoomer. I'm your host, Aaron Lichtig, Xometry guy and former Jeopardy champion, and I'm excited to be here today with Wilbert Pierce. Wilbert, he operates his own design engineering company. He also works at Longevity Neuro Solutions, and he lives right here in Maryland. He's in the Baltimore area, not too far from Xometry's headquarters. So welcome, Wilbert. It's great to have you here.
Oh, great. Thanks to be here. Also amazed you left off the Jeopardy champion part. That's way more interesting than what I do. Hold up.
Yeah, well, I only did it for one day. I'm a one-day champ, not my career. I wish it were my career. Playing Jeopardy would be a wonderful career.
One more day than I've been on Jeopardy, I can tell you that.
Cool. So first of all, I have to ask you, what are all those masks behind you there?
So part of my quarantine ritual was to find one thing to bring me peace, and I decided that through trying to get my kids and other kids interested in engineering and STEM related fields, I'd pick a subject and I would build projects based on that and share them with my kids, their classmates over Zoom. So I started 3D printing Iron Man helmets. So like everything from like the classic like comic looks to like some of the movie versions and everything in between. And then I have a few concept artists that I've worked with that I'm going to turn some of their like concept pieces into like fully wearable helmets. And so it's a mix between my evolution from like my high school like cosplay days to like learning some of these like CAD skills and putting them to use, and just trying to get kids excited about STEM, especially with arts and like budgets like that getting cut.
That's
So I
awesome.
think I have 2, 4, 20 on this shelf, a huge one next to the computer, and 3 or 4 in my backyard drawing with spray paint.
You are right up there on the list of coolest backgrounds ever on Ok Xoomer. Definitely in the top 5.
Oh man, that'll go down the more people we have on.
For sure. Cool. So what kind of work do you do at your design and engineering firm?
So I take on a lot of varying product development and product visualization projects.
Mhm.
My core skill set and competency is in 3D imaging and CAD. So that's kind of how I came to work, in medtech. Was I was able to transition some of the skills from my freelance days. I worked freelancing on a bunch of projects. I designed sex toys, normal collectibles for just comic book nerds, video games, and I was able to like come to them when they bought a 3D printer company in an acquisition, and I was able to come and say, hey, I can help turn the things you have on the computer and use them on the printer to further, And so I took up that role in the company as well. It's like pre-product visualization all the way through manufacturability and testing and things like that.
What are some of your most favorite projects that you've worked on?
Ooh, and right at the beginning of quarantine, actually, I took on a project with John Hopkins Hospital right at the street from me. And we were digitally scanning babies with cleft palates. So as part of this workflow to digitize an analog process, so we would get these intraoral scans of the babies done, or they would still use like traditional molding practices to get the footprint of their cleft palate. And then using CAD and some of my Formlabs printers here, we would print out these plates that would essentially perform the Invisalign process, but on the cleft palate itself. So I think we had 2 babies go through the IRB study, and they're just so adorable when they have the little parts in their mouths. There's a button that exists on the plate for external placement of things that attach to their cheeks. Like they use that to hold it in along with like just the suction tension of the plate itself. So like I was getting these pictures of just babies look like they were smoking little cigars. It was the best thing ever. And then so it was the feeling that I was able to help them at least begin to study the digitization of this process and like try to incorporate it. So we did the 2 babies that went for I think 40 weeks, and then at the end of the process, once the cleft is closed, to a satisfactory point, then they'll do the surgery where they repair the lip. And So at the very least, it was just like a normal, it's fun design work. But I was able to as a father. I was able to help, kids that aren't my own. Uh, and then yeah, and then like it was the first project of that size that I had ever tried to take on by myself. As after launching the firm, so I was like, oh, okay, I can't screw this up. The baby's on the line, but also I logistically can't screw this up. I don't think I have enough money to be sued by Hopkins. We got to get this right the first time.
That's great. So it did work the first time.
Yeah. There were a few different studies internationally to try to do very similar things. So for this research, it was me, one facial maxillary surgeon, and then I guess it was two of them. I guess that's both their practice. So we would have these meetings once a week to look over the feature scope and create essentially a wish list where it's like, okay, this is version 1. What would we want in version 2? What would we want in version 3? And then the hospital logistic portion of it. It's like, okay, well, what resources will we need from the hospital? What will the hospital want to see out of the study? And then it's also like a very fine window. So there's like a particular percentage of babies that are born with the defect. And it's a very specific window in like pre-birth ultrasounding where you can identify it and then further identify candidates. So of all the babies they treated, there was only 2 that, one, we fit the criteria of what we were looking for, but also like the parents were interested in, trying this and, other approvals. So I mean, of the two that we identified, everything went well, and they're running around with their full lips now.
Nice. Are there any other projects that particularly stand out?
I think back when I was doing more collectible work, I did my first contract project for Marvel. And that's kind of always been like my holy grail. Like when people ask, like, what's your dream job? Working on, most particularly an Iron Man movie. If you follow the movies, you'll kind of figure out why that's probably no longer possible. But working on a Marvel property is like the thing that I would drop a few other things to go do. So like to have worked on these collectibles. And one of the fun parts about collectibles is, if you negotiate right, you get a copy of all the things you design. So I just have boxes of stuff my wife won't let me put up in the living room.
Awesome. Well, I hope you get that chance someday to work on a Marvel project, even if it's not Iron Man.
Oh, man, there's a few shows coming up, and I've already started like figuring out like, who do I know where. I didn't know anybody 10 years ago, but I think I know some people now. We'll just wants to design and 3D print some Marvel stuff, guys.
Cool. So how did you get into design engineering as a career?
That was looking back at it, it's a very straightforward translation, but at the time it wasn't because of just what I knew. So I was always creative as a kid growing up. I drew Pokemon things, and it was like 2 aspects. It was like I was creative, but then I also already knew I had like entrepreneurial tendencies because I would draw the Pokemon and I would sell Pokemon drawings at school. So for like 25 cents a piece, you got like an original piece of Pokemon art for me. And then I took all that and I invested it in if you remember the Scholastic book fairs.
Oh yeah.
They would always come around and they always had to like how to draw Nintendo, how to draw Pokemon. And I took all my earnings and invested them back into the how to draw books. I'm like, figured that out. And I went up to high school where I started selling Yu-Gi-Oh cards, but that's a whole nother podcast. But where I grew up in PG County, when you're young, especially like when you're young and black, I had this talent, so everyone just naturally assumed, well, that's the thing you're going to do for work. It was like, oh, okay, why would you not do the thing you're good at for work? And going through high school, we had arts programs, and they prepared you for like studio art and college, and there was some college preparation because before that I hadn't even thought about college. Like, I guess I'll go if my parents can afford it. But I was able to get a scholarship to Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Art, so I moved up to Philadelphia and I went there. And the longer I studied the traditional arts, because school didn't practice anything digital, it was all very painting, sculpting, printmaking, the very traditional fine arts. I realized that there were 2 problems that I was coming up to very quickly. It was that the nature of being an artist is not very well described to children. So it was like I just thought I was going to draw and people were going to pay me for it, just like elementary school. But then you realize that again, there's this business aspect that they don't really teach you until you get to a certain level. So it's like, okay, networking. I have to get good relationships with gallery owners and start to, you know, develop a body of work to show, and then they would sell at the gallery. And there's this whole like second hidden, I won't say agenda, but like a hidden secret to being an artist as a job, as opposed to like being creative as a kid, that was not translated very well for me. So that, and I would talk to my roommates at the time about it. I was like, guys, I don't want to be a painter. I don't want to paint in a studio for like months at a time and then try to sell my paintings. Like, I now understand the concept of a starving artist in that regard, but not necessarily like the way that maybe some people will use it as like a way to deter kids from the arts, but more so an affirmation saying, yeah, you're creative, but we never taught you how to monetize it essentially. Like, we didn't teach you how to make a viable living from your talent. We just taught you that you had one. And that's something I've been exploring. You know, I'll be 30 in 2 months. So that's something I'm starting to explore in other areas of people's interests. Like, my son is interested in music. So trying to like give him already the idea that like, there's a difference between being musically inclined and wanting to pursue music as a career. And there's overlap, but there might be different things. There might be different, you know, skills you'll have to master in each of those domains that you'll have to bring together to figure it out. But thankfully, I now have like that, you know, experience to like say, hey, okay, as opposed to just saying, yep, you can play the piano, you're gonna be a musician. And so one day my roommate was, you know, he was explaining to me, he's like, hey, I'm coming to school to get a degree in sculpture, but I want to work in video games. And when he said it, I couldn't. It's 2009. I don't think commercial desktop printers were too available, like at least like in the price range of a college student.
Yeah.
Like I couldn't. Like I remember like wanting the first iPhone, and I was just priced out of it. I was like, oh man, if only I had iPhone money. And it was like 3D. So like the concept of a 3D printer was already so far gone to me. So I was like, okay, So you're gonna make a thing on the computer. Yep. And at some point it'll get physically made, like CNC mill. And they're like, no, like 3D printers, man. So like sculpting and casting like we do in school. No, not bronze casting, 3D printed. Like, so the idea, they were already starting to lay this idea that this was something that was happening. And a lot of we started having more conversations about that. And they're like, hey, why did you come to school? And I was like, because my parents told me to go to college. And it's like, okay, but so what's your plan at school? It's like, get good grades. That's all I got. And they're like, have you thought of it? So it was really my first two roommates in college that really helped me flesh out like these understandings. So I'm extremely grateful for them for like sitting me down and like asking me these questions that I had never really thought of before. And, you know, through that, I realized like I definitely want to keep at some of the more creative aspects of what I do. I don't necessarily want to do art, like art in the traditional sense. Like I enjoy the skills that I picked up doing it, but that's not necessarily what I want to do. But I know I want to still be hands-on and be creative. So that led to just basic 3D modeling. So I got started that same summer in 2009. They sat me down with 3D Studio Max. I think it was Max 9 or 10. It was my first foray into online forums. So they showed me like, oh, this is like the 3D Max user forum. Everyone goes here to ask questions. And through that, I was able to like have conversations with like people that I really never thought I'd meet. So I remember my first conversation I posted in an Iron Man group. I think it was Phil Saunders that I had commented on it. And like, it was so just like, oh yeah, guy on the forums commented. And then like realizing that was the guy that did design some of the Iron Man stuff for that first movie. And I was like, oh, yeah. Oh, wow. People online like that just talk to me. Like at 19, I had no concept of like how amazing that was. But now I'm just like, oh man, I should have asked way more questions.
Yeah, it's a very friendly community in many ways.
And it's weird. Like I've worked in medtech the last 5 years. I worked in a few other different areas. And what I enjoy most about 3D printing is like independent of industry, 3D printing is like so permeable, and like the core community itself is just so open and wanting to share information in ways that like private companies necessarily aren't or can't.
Yeah.
Like where I'm used to like people guarding proprietary or like the secret sauce, like people in 3D printing aren't necessarily trying to like hold maybe all the trade secrets. Like, you know, if you develop a printing technology, that's one thing, but like optimizing parts to be printed. And a lot of design for additive manufacturing is just like this open group, and people are so willing to like share what they know. It's like it's very refreshing, and I enjoy it because I enjoy teaching myself. So like I was telling a buddy, like when I do renderings, it's very easy for me to go for 40 minutes on like index of refraction values in 3D. Like I'll go to like all the clear values and like tell you the difference between whether you want to be photorealistic or if you're trying to do marketing. Like those, because those aren't necessarily always independent of each other. So yeah, it was through a lot of that early like learning how to 3D model journey, and a lot of the projects I was building at the time, it was already in my head. I was like, I knew I wanted to build something, and I knew I wanted to have it 3D printed one day. Like I didn't know how long that would be, which thankfully I think Formlabs burst like 2 years after that with the Form 1, the Kickstarter. So like I didn't know how close I was. I just knew at one point I was going to 3D print the thing that I made. So I freelanced for a long time after that, from about January of that next year till when I decided I wanted to formally open, a design studio. And it was all kinds of wild projects. All kinds of that's all I'll say about that one. All kinds of wild projects in the beginning. It was like whatever crazy idea someone had, I would try my best to help them realize that. But my wife did ask that I have privacy screens on my computer monitors. That was one caveat with our small kids.
I see. Yes, this is a family show. So
Yeah.
I won't go into too much detail on that. But as you look at like some of the things that are happening with the future of design and the future of additive manufacturing, what are some things you're most excited about?
I want to say just the adoption in not even necessarily industry, but in the adoption in like everyday life. We have people like I think it's Evan who's working on Cocoa Press, and it's like just the idea that someone is pushing to 3D print chocolate is one thing, but then like on the other side of that, it's like where will that application fall? It's like okay, as most technologies, it'll probably start at one price point lower, so you'll probably get like high-end restaurants that want to 3D print fancy chocolate. Mm-hmm. But at some point in my life, my kids' life, my grandkids' life, they might just have little easy bake cocoa presses where they put in the mix and it 3D prints them in a shape that the parents help them load into it. You have things like Pancake Bot, and some of it's like this very niche idea, but for me, it's the idea that more people are just going to start 3D printing objects. I try to explain to people that it's one thing. I spend a lot of time in Micro Center. And when I see people buying stuff, I try to help them best I can. Like, what do you want to print? What are you trying to do with it? And most people are like, I want to do like a cosplay prop, or I want to print this little widget. And I'm like, cool, you're doing cosplay stuff? Don't worry about fancy colors. We're going to paint it. You want to just print some stuff you found on Thingiverse? Go your heart out. Get rainbow colors, anything you want. But what, like I was telling you before the show, my kids broke the knobs off my oven, and it was for me that spark when my wife realized that I took the last remaining oven knob downstairs, took it to SolidWorks, built it, and then 3D printed 4 new oven knobs. And it was like this light in her eyes, where it was like for the first time in like our marriage probably, she understood what I did, but on 2 levels. It was like, oh, he can make stuff for the house now, but also like he created that in 15 minutes in our basement, and now it's a real thing in the real world. So there's if I didn't have kids, it's probably the closest thing I would approximate to like having kids. It's like something you made in a non-tangible world is now physical, and like I just want as many people as possible to experience that. Like across industry, I'm trying to figure out the best way to 3D print parts for my car. I have a cousin who's very into like the technical workings of automobiles, and I would like to show him like, hey, I mean, you got to get yourself a big printer or print a bunch of pieces. Let's make a spoiler, or so finding ways to like bond further with this family member between our like interests. Like I want to 3D print a ridiculously novel thing for my car exterior. You know a lot about cars. you're gonna, to build him up to when he's like, okay, well, how can I 3D print stuff for my cars? And it'll probably start with like knickknacks for the inside, parts for the outside. But I know that the way his brain works is going to get to the question, can I do interior parts?
Something bigger for the exterior.
Like just like I purposefully haven't told him about metal printing just like so we can build, and it's just withholding that little piece of information gives us so much to bond over in the meantime.
Cool. Well, you earlier, something you said really resonated with me, which was that idea that there's, if you have a skill or if you have a talent, say in art or music, you gotta, yeah. And I'm a father too. I have two young boys, and you have to help them see those connections between kind of the business side or the more entrepreneurial side of all these other skills you need to develop to turn that talent into a career. That's a really incredible point that I want to drive home with my own kids.
If I hadn't suffered myself, I would not have been able. Like if I had just went to college and graduated college and someone gave me like a graphic design job, I never would have questioned it. But it was then like some of my earlier life choices. So like, why am I in college? I went because someone told me I had to, or like because they told me I should.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm also gonna have to pay back these student loans. So how does that work? How am I gonna get money for the thing I just went to college for? And then just from every day from there, trying to figure out. I think my wife says it. She tells me you have to have 3 hobbies, and it's like one that makes you money, one that keeps you fit, and one that makes you happy. And she also gets frustrated that aside from like the healthy part, maybe like designing stuff kind of checks those other boxes for me. So it's like, but it also leads to a situation where I kind of don't stop working. So you can email me at like midnight with a crazy idea, and I'm like, okay, well, we're gonna figure it out in the next 15 minutes, that's for sure.
Nice. Well, Wilbert, thank you so much for joining OK Xoomer. This has been a great conversation.
Oh, thanks for having me. Sorry, my day kind of lost me and we got around there, but I'm glad we were able to fix that up.
No problem. And everybody, thanks again for watching. We'll be back in another couple days with another episode of OK Xoomer. Stay safe and stay healthy.